am Vivian, 31 years old, and I still remember the exact sound of a champagne glass shattering against the marble floor on the night of my daughter's 5th birthday party. My husband stood in the middle of the ballroom, holding up his phone, showing 200 guests photos of me with a stranger in a hotel room I had never once set foot in. "Get out of my house," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "and don't you dare think you'll ever see her again." Before we continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if you've ever been falsely accused by someone who was supposed to love you, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is for you. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Forks froze halfway to open mouths. Somewhere near the dessert table, my daughter Nora, still wearing her tiny party crown, looked up at me with confusion instead of joy. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, stood beside Adrian with one hand pressed dramatically to her chest, but her eyes told a different story. They were bright, almost gleeful, the eyes of a woman watching a play she herself had helped direct. "I want you gone from this house tonight," Adrian hissed again, stepping toward me, close enough that only I could hear the venom underneath his performance. I stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds, staring at photos of a woman who looked like me but wasn't me, in a room I had never entered, with a man I had never met. Then I looked past Adrian's shoulder, at Eleanor's barely concealed smile, at the dozens of guests already reaching for their phones to record the scandal, at my daughter's small trembling hands gripping the hem of her party dress. They thought this was the end of me. They thought a few doctored photographs and a well-timed public humiliation were enough to erase 8 years of marriage, 6 years of quiet sacrifice, and every ounce of trust I had ever given this family. What none of them knew, not Adrian, not Eleanor, not even my own daughter watching me with confusion in her eyes, was that in exactly 9 days, every single person in that room would be forced to confront the truth. And by then, it would be far too late for any of them to take back what they had done. I picked up my purse from the table with steady hands. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked directly at Adrian and said only 4 words. "You'll regret this, Adrian." Then I walked out of my own home, past 200 stunned guests, past the security guard who wouldn't meet my eyes, past the driveway where my car keys no longer worked, because Adrian had already changed the locks on the garage that afternoon. I stood on the sidewalk in the cold October air, listening to the muffled sound of music starting up again inside, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just been erased from my own family in front of everyone we knew. I had no idea, in that moment, standing alone under a streetlight with nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back, that the very thing Adrian had used to destroy me, his arrogant certainty that I had nothing, that I was nothing without him, was about to become the exact reason his entire world would collapse. Adrian and I met 6 years ago at a fundraising gala in downtown Boston, back when I was still a data analyst working remotely for a small cybersecurity firm, wearing a rented dress that cost more than my entire month's rent. He was charming that night, attentive in a way that made me feel like the only person in the room. I didn't know then that charm for Adrian was simply another tool, something he deployed and withdrew depending on what he needed from a person. His mother, Eleanor Whitfield, made her opinion of me clear within the first 10 minutes of our introduction. She looked me up and down at a family dinner, taking in my department shoes and my unpolished nails, and said, loudly enough for the entire table to hear, "So this is the girl who types on computers all day." She said it way other people might describe someone who cleaned houses for a living, not with cruelty exactly, but with the absolute certainty that I existed several rungs beneath her. Eleanor had already chosen someone else for Adrian long before I arrived. Her name was Sienna Cross, the daughter of one of the Whitfield family's most valuable business partners, a man whose investment firm quietly financed nearly a third of the pharmaceutical company where Adrian worked as vice president of sales. Sienna was polished, connected, and, most importantly to Eleanor, came with a business alliance already built into her bloodline. I was simply an obstacle standing in the way of a merger Eleanor had been planning since before Adrian and I ever met. For years, I told myself none of that mattered. Adrian chose me. We built a life together. We had Nora. I convinced myself that love was enough to outweigh a mother-in-law's cold calculations, and for a while, it seemed to be true. But 3 weeks before Nora's 5th birthday, something in Adrian shifted. He started taking business trips that stretched longer than they should have, weekend conferences that somehow always landed on Friday nights, and never seemed to produce a single follow-up email. I didn't question it. I trusted him the way you trust a floor you've walked across 1,000 times, never imagining it could give way beneath you. What I didn't tell Adrian, what I hadn't told anyone except my younger brother, Marcus, was that I had spent the last 2 years building something of my own in the quiet hours after Nora went to bed. Long before I married into the Whitfield family, I had studied data encryption, and somewhere along the way, buried under diaper changes and school pickups, I never stopped. I had been developing an encrypted data security framework for hospital systems, working nights and weekends with a small independent team, refusing every offer that came in too low, waiting for the right buyer. I never mentioned it to Adrian, not because I was hiding something shameful, but because early in our marriage, when I once tried to explain a project I was proud of, he had cut me off mid-sentence to take a work call and never asked about it again. After that, I simply stopped sharing that part of myself with him. It became mine alone, a small, private world where I still existed as someone other than Adrian's wife, or the girl who types on computers. I had no idea, sitting at my daughter's birthday party 3 weeks later, smiling for photographs I didn't know were already being staged as evidence against me, that this private world of mine, the one thing Adrian had never bothered to ask about, was about to become the very weapon that would save me. 2 days before the party, Adrian froze our joint checking account without telling me. I only discovered it by accident, standing in line at the grocery store when my card was declined for a $40 purchase. I remember laughing it off, assuming it was some kind of bank error, calling the customer service line while balancing a gallon of milk on my hip. The representative's voice was polite but firm. The account had been restricted by the primary holder that morning. Adrian was the primary holder. I was not. I didn't think much of it at the time. I told myself it was some tax issue, some paperwork mix-up he'd forgotten to mention. It never once crossed my mind that a man I had shared a bed with for 8 years was quietly dismantling my access to our life, piece by piece, days before he planned to destroy the rest of it in public. What I didn't know, what I would only learn a week later, sitting in my brother's cramped apartment scrolling through documents that made my stomach turn, was that Adrian had filed for divorce a full week before Nora's birthday party, not after the humiliation at the party, before it. The photographs, the public accusation, the theatrical outrage in front of 200 guests, none of it was a reaction. It was a performance, carefully timed to a legal filing that was already sitting in a courthouse system, waiting. Eleanor had helped him build the case. I learned later that she had personally reached out to a private investigator 2 months earlier, not to uncover any real affair, because there wasn't one, but to commission something else entirely, a fabricated one. She wanted photographs. She wanted a paper trail. She wanted a story clean enough to survive a courtroom and cruel enough to end any argument I might try to make. Sienna Cross, the woman Eleanor had always wanted for her son, wasn't a distant fantasy anymore either. 3 weeks before the party, she had already started appearing at Whitfield family dinners, seated exactly where I used to sit, laughing at jokes I used to be the only one who understood. Nobody told me. I found out from a photograph a distant cousin had posted online, a candid shot from a dinner I hadn't been invited to, at a house I had once called home. The night of the party itself was the final piece of a plan that had been in motion for months. Adrian needed a clean, undeniable justification, something loud enough, humiliating enough, that no judge would question it, and no friend would defend me against it. A quiet divorce filing wouldn't strip me of custody fast enough. A public scandal would. Standing on that sidewalk after being thrown out of my own home, I didn't yet understand the scale of what had been built against me. All I knew was that Adrian had frozen our accounts, that my daughter had watched her father humiliate her mother in front of 200 strangers, and that I had nowhere to go. My brother Marcus answered his phone on the first ring. I could barely get the words out before he was already grabbing his car keys. Marcus had spent 6 years as a senior cybersecurity analyst before recently leaving to start his own firm, the kind of person who read metadata the way other people read headlines. He had never trusted Adrian, not once, not from the very first family dinner where he watched Elena speak to me like I was hired help. "Don't say anything to him. Don't sign anything," Marcus told me when he pulled up to the curb 20 minutes later, his headlights cutting through the dark street. "Not one word, not one signature, until I've seen exactly what they're using against you." I didn't know yet how right he would turn out to be. I didn't know that within days, the very photographs meant to end my marriage in disgrace would instead become the evidence that ended Adrian's entire carefully constructed world. The custody hearing happened faster than I ever thought possible. 3 days after the party, I received a certified letter informing me that Adrian had filed for an emergency temporary order, citing moral unfitness and a documented pattern of infidelity as grounds to suspend my visitation rights until a full hearing could be scheduled. Eleanor's name appeared on the sworn affidavit attached to the filing, describing behavior she claimed to have witnessed personally, behavior that had never happened. I sat in Marcus's cramped living room reading the document twice. Then a third time, my hands shaking so badly I had to set it down on the coffee table. Eleanor had signed her name under penalty of perjury, swearing to lies she had helped manufacture herself. I remember feeling something shift inside me in that moment, not despair exactly, but a kind of cold, focused clarity I hadn't felt since I was building spreadsheets under deadline pressure at my old cybersecurity job. The judge assigned to the emergency hearing barely looked at me. He looked at the photographs Adrian's lawyer submitted, glossy printouts of a woman who resembled me standing far close to a stranger in what appeared to be a hotel corridor. He looked at Eleanor's sworn statement. He looked at a character reference letter from a family friend, describing me as emotionally erratic since the birth of her daughter, a phrase I would later learn Eleanor had personally suggested to the man who wrote it. I was granted 2 supervised hours with Nora each week, in a sterile visitation center with fluorescent lighting and a caseworker taking notes in the corner. I sat across a small plastic table from my own daughter, watching her color in a picture book, terrified to hug her too tightly in case it looked, on some invisible scorecard, like the wrong kind of desperation. "Mommy, why can't I come home with you?" Nora asked during our second visit, her crayon frozen mid-stroke. I didn't have an answer that wouldn't break both our hearts, so I told her the only true thing I could offer, because some grown-ups are being confused right now, sweetheart. "But I promise you I am not going anywhere." While I was losing hours with my daughter, I was also losing something else I hadn't expected, my work. The healthcare technology conglomerate I had been quietly negotiating with for over a year suddenly went silent. Emails I sent went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. It took Marcus less than a day to discover why. Adrian had personally contacted the lead negotiator, introducing himself as my legal representative, informing them that I was, in his words, currently undergoing a serious personal crisis, and that any pending agreements should be paused indefinitely pending the outcome of a divorce proceeding. He had no legal standing to say any of that. He wasn't my lawyer. He wasn't authorized to speak for me in any capacity, but a call from Adrian Whitfield, heir to a respected pharmaceutical dynasty, carried enough weight that the negotiator simply complied without asking a single question. I felt the walls closing in from every direction at once. My daughter, my finances, my career, all of it slipping through fingers I could no longer control. Eleanor, meanwhile, was busy hosting Sienna at increasingly public family gatherings, introducing her at a charity luncheon as the woman our family always hoped Adrian would end up with, as if I had simply been a placeholder these past 8 years, an inconvenient detour on the way to the marriage Eleanor had always wanted for her son. What none of them accounted for was Marcus. While I sat in supervised visitation rooms trying not to cry in front of a caseworker, my brother was sitting in front of 3 monitors late into the night, quietly pulling apart the metadata buried inside the photographs that had destroyed my life, following a digital trail that Adrian Eleanor had never imagined anyone would think to look for. Marcus called me on the 7th night after the party, his voice tight with a mixture of exhaustion and something close to fury. I had been asleep on his pull-out couch for maybe an hour when my phone buzzed against the coffee table. "Vivian, come look at this, right now." I found him hunched over his desk, 3 monitors glowing in the dark, a half-finished cup of cold coffee pushed to the side. He turned the middle screen toward me, and I saw rows of technical data I didn't fully understand, timestamps, file histories, compression signatures. "These photos," Marcus said, pointing at the image that had been shown to 200 guests at Nora's birthday party, "were never taken at any hotel. This is a composite. Someone took a photo of you from an old promotional shoot you did 2 years ago for your old firm and grafted it onto a stock backdrop, then layered in a second person entirely." He pulled up a side-by-side comparison, tracing the seams around the edges of my face, the slightly mismatched lighting on my shoulder. "It's clean work, but not clean enough to survive a forensic review." My stomach turned as the pieces clicked into place. I hadn't just been lied about. I had been digitally fabricated, piece by piece, by someone who knew exactly what image to steal and exactly how to twist it into a weapon. "Who's the man in the photo?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus clicked open another window. "A freelance actor. I found him through a reverse image search. He does staged photo work for hire, mostly harmless stuff, corporate stock photography. But 3 weeks ago, someone paid him $500 for a private photo session. The payment came through a freelance platform under an account registered to a phone number." He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of it to land. "The number traces back to Sienna Cross." I sat down hard on the edge of his desk chair, my mind refusing to fully process what he was showing me. Sienna hadn't just been waiting patiently in the wings for Adrian to discard me. She had actively built the weapon that discarded me. But Marcus wasn't finished. He opened a second folder, this one containing something far more damning than a doctored photograph. Buried inside a batch of files he had traced back through a poorly secured cloud backup, one Adrian had apparently forgotten was still synced to an old work laptop, were email threads between Adrian and his divorce attorney, dated over a month before the party. I read them twice before I could speak. Adrian hadn't been blindsided by anything. He had been planning this with surgical precision. One email in particular made my hands go cold. "We need the custody order finalized before her deal closes, in case there are shared assets to consider. Better to move fast." He knew, I said quietly, more to myself than to Marcus. He knew about the acquisition. "He's known for months," Marcus confirmed, his jaw tight. "There's an email here from 6 weeks ago where he mentions a healthcare data platform under negotiation and asks his lawyer whether spousal disclosure laws would apply to pending deals not yet finalized." Vivian, he wasn't reacting to a scandal. He built one, specifically timed to strip you of custody and leverage before your company's sale could ever touch your bank account. I sat in the dim glow of Marcus's monitors for a long time after that, staring at proof that the man I had built a life with had spent months constructing my public humiliation as a financial strategy. There was no confusion in it, no jealous impulse, no moment of weakness. It had been calculated the way Adrian calculated everything: quarterly targets, sales projections, and now, apparently, the destruction of his own wife. I didn't cry. I felt something colder settle over me instead, something steady and precise. "Send everything to my lawyer first thing tomorrow," I told Marcus, "and find out everything you can about Sienna's father's business dealings with the Whitfield family. If Adrian wants to play this game with evidence, I want to know exactly what happens when the person funding half his career finds out what he's really made of." My lawyer, a sharp, unflappable woman named Renata Cole, read through the evidence Marcus had gathered without a single visible reaction, which somehow unsettled me more than if she'd gasped out loud. She simply nodded, made a few notes, and looked up at me across her desk. "This isn't just enough to win back custody, Vivian," she said. "This is enough to end his career, but we're not filing it yet." I stared at her, confused. Why would we wait? Nora is stuck in a supervised visitation room right now because of lies. Every day we wait is another day I lose with her. Renata leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. Because right now, Adrian believes he's already won. Eleanor believes it. The judge believes it, based on what he's seen so far. If we file this quietly, as a standard motion, Adrian's attorney will spend a few days trying to discredit it, delay it, maybe even settle it privately to avoid embarrassment. We lose the one advantage we actually have: surprise. She tapped the folder containing Marcus's forensic analysis. "This isn't just custody evidence. This is proof of a coordinated fraud. Used correctly, it doesn't just win your case. It destroys every foundation Adrian has built his life on." It took everything in me not to argue with her. Every instinct I had as a mother screamed to move immediately, to get my daughter back the second it was legally possible. But some quieter, colder part of me, the part that had spent 2 years building an encryption platform in total secrecy, without telling a single person in my own family, understood exactly what Renata meant. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Patience," she said, "and silence. You continue attending your supervised visits exactly as scheduled. You say nothing to Adrian, nothing to Eleanor, nothing to anyone in that family. You let them believe." That same week, my acquisition deal finally moved forward again. After days of unanswered emails, the healthcare technology conglomerate reached back out directly to me, having apparently done their own quiet due diligence and discovered that Adrian had no legal authority to speak on my behalf in any capacity. The lead negotiator apologized for the delay and confirmed that, pending final signatures, the 10-day holding period on the $18 million buyout would begin the following Monday. I said nothing about it to anyone outside Marcus and Renata, not to my closest friends, not to the handful of Whitfield relatives who still occasionally texted to check on me out of some residual guilt. I let the silence around me do exactly what Renata wanted it to do: convince everyone watching that Vivian Whitfield had nothing left to fight with. Meanwhile, Eleanor was busy planning something of her own. 2 weeks after the party, I learned through a cousin's careless comment that Adrian and Sienna were officially engaged, and that Eleanor was already organizing an engagement gala at the Fairview Grand Hotel, the same venue where the Whitfield family had hosted every major celebration for 3 generations. It was meant to be a public declaration, a final closing of the door on my place in that family, performed in front of every business partner, investor, and society friend the Whitfields had ever cultivated. I remember sitting with that information for a long moment, turning it over in my mind, before I finally understood what Renata had been waiting for all along. "They're handing us the perfect stage," I told her the next morning, sliding the invitation details across her desk. "Every person who matters to Adrian's career, every investor tied to his company, every friend who watched him humiliate me at Nora's party, they'll all be in the same room again." Renata allowed herself, for the first time since I'd met her, a small and dangerous smile. "Then that's exactly where we're going to file this." The custody hearing was scheduled for the Friday before the engagement gala, and Renata insisted we treat it as a separate battle entirely, one we needed to win cleanly and quietly before making any public move. "Never let them see two attacks coming from the same direction," she told me in the elevator on our way up to the courtroom. "Win this one on the law, save the other one for the room full of witnesses." Adrian arrived with his high-priced attorney, a broad-shouldered man named Sterling Hayes, who carried himself like he had never once lost a case in his life. Eleanor sat 2 rows behind them, dressed in charcoal grey, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief she never actually needed. I sat beside Renata at the defense table, my hands folded calmly in my lap, exactly as she'd instructed. No visible tears, no visible anger, just quiet, steady patience. Hayes opened with the same photographs, the same fabricated affidavit from Eleanor, painting a picture of a woman too emotionally unstable and financially unstable to be trusted with a child. He gestured toward my bank statement, the one Adrian had frozen weeks earlier, showing a balance that had dwindled to less than $50. "Your Honor," Hayes said, his voice booming with rehearsed outrage, "this is a woman with no income, no stable housing, and a documented pattern of infidelity. My client is simply trying to protect his daughter." Renata rose slowly, unhurried, and placed a single folder on the judge's bench. "Your Honor, before we proceed further, I'd like to submit a forensic technology report prepared by a certified cybersecurity analyst, along with a complete metadata analysis of the photographs presented as evidence in this case." The judge's expression shifted almost immediately as he began flipping through the report, the mismatched lighting, the composite layering, the freelance payment records tracing directly back to a phone number registered to Sienna Cross. Hayes shot a sharp, alarmed glance toward Adrian, who had gone visibly pale in his seat. Furthermore, Renata continued, sliding a second document across the bench. "We have email correspondence between Mr. Whitfield and his legal counsel, dated over a month prior to the alleged incident, discussing strategies to secure custody before a pending financial settlement could be finalized. This was not a response to infidelity, Your Honor. This was premeditated fraud." The courtroom went very quiet. Eleanor's handkerchief stopped moving entirely. Judge Caldwell, a stern woman who had clearly seen every manipulation tactic a desperate parent could attempt, removed her glasses and looked directly at Adrian for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Mr. Hayes," she said finally, "I trust you were not aware of the true nature of this evidence when you brought it before my court." Hayes stammered through an answer that satisfied no one, least of all himself. Within 20 minutes, the emergency custody order was fully reversed. I was granted immediate, unrestricted physical and legal custody of Nora, and the judge ordered a formal referral to the district attorney's office to review the fabricated evidence for possible perjury and fraud charges. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply stood, gathered my things, and walked out of that courtroom with my daughter's future finally secured, one battle won, exactly as quietly and cleanly as Renata had promised. But as we stepped into the hallway, Adrian caught up to me, his composed public mask completely gone, replaced by something raw and furious. He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. "You think this is over," he hissed, his voice shaking. "I have a company behind me, Vivian. I have people who matter. You have nothing. Tomorrow night, at my engagement gala, Every person who matters in this city is going to see exactly who abandoned this family, and it isn't me. I looked down at his hand on my arm until he let go, then met his eyes with a calm that clearly unsettled him far more than screaming ever could have. "I'll see you there, Adrian," I said quietly. "Wear something nice. It's going to be a night everyone remembers." The Fairview Grand Hotel looked exactly as I remembered it from a dozen family celebrations over the years: soaring gold-leafed ceilings, crystal chandeliers casting warm light across a sea of black-tie guests, a string quartet playing softly near the entrance. Tonight, none of that warmth was meant for me. Tonight, it was meant to celebrate the woman who had replaced me in the same ballroom where I had once celebrated my own engagement 8 years earlier. I arrived deliberately late, dressed in a deep emerald gown Renata had insisted I buy for exactly this purpose. "You're not walking in there as a victim," she told me that afternoon, adjusting the fabric at my shoulder. "You're walking in there as the person about to end his career." Beside me stood Marcus, sharp in a black suit, carrying a slim leather folder under one arm, and Renata herself, composed and unreadable as always, flanking my other side. The moment the ballroom doors opened, the string quartet faltered mid-note. Conversations dimmed into an uneasy hush as heads turned toward the entrance. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes tracking my every step across the marble floor, the same eyes that had watched Adrian humiliate me in this very city weeks earlier, now watching me walk back into the exact world that had cast me out. Adrian spotted me first. I watched the champagne glass in his hand freeze halfway to his lips, his face draining of colour beneath the warm ballroom lighting. Beside him, Sienna turned to follow his gaze, confusion flickering across her carefully made-up face. Eleanor, standing just a few feet away in a shimmering silver gown, dropped her small clutch purse entirely, the soft thud swallowed by the sudden silence spreading through the room. "What is she doing here?" I heard Eleanor whisper harshly to no one in particular, though the words carried further than she intended in the stillness. I didn't stop walking. I moved with deliberate, unhurried steps toward the center of the ballroom, exactly where a large screen had been set up earlier for the evening's planned tribute video. A slideshow of Adrian and Sienna's whirlwind romance, curated no doubt by Eleanor herself. Renata gave a small, discreet nod toward a technician standing near the audiovisual booth, someone Marcus had quietly arranged to be present hours earlier. Adrian moved to intercept me before I could reach the center of the room, his voice low and sharp, meant only for my ears. "You need to leave, right now. This is a private event." "I have an invitation," I said calmly, holding his gaze without flinching. "Your mother's assistant sent the guest list to the venue coordinator weeks ago. My name's still on it." I checked. His jaw tightened, a muscle flickering beneath his skin. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I glanced past him toward the crowd of investors, board members, and society friends who had gathered specifically to celebrate his supposed happy ending. "Or am I about to embarrass you, in front of every single person whose respect you've spent your whole career trying to earn?" Something in his expression shifted then, not confidence exactly, but the first flicker of real fear I had ever seen cross Adrian's face. He glanced quickly toward Sienna's father, Richard Cross, who stood near the bar speaking with two of Adrian's senior colleagues from the pharmaceutical company, entirely unaware that the foundation of tonight's celebration was about to collapse beneath him. Marcus stepped up beside me, opening the leather folder just enough to reveal the edge of a printed document, and gave Adrian a look that needed no words at all. Renata remained perfectly still on my other side, her expression unreadable, waiting for exactly the right moment. The large screen behind me flickered once, then steadied, ready to display something entirely different from the romantic slideshow Eleanor had spent weeks preparing. I turned to face the crowd, raised my voice just enough to carry across the sudden hush of the ballroom, and said the only thing that mattered. Before the toasts begin tonight, I think everyone deserves to see something first. Chapter 4, Part 2. The screen behind me came alive with sound before it came alive with image. Adrian's own voice, unmistakable, filling the ballroom through the venue's sound system. It was the recording Marcus had pulled from the backup files weeks earlier, an audio clip laid beneath, the scrolling text of the actual email correspondence, timed and edited by Renata's technical team to play exactly like a piece of evidence, not a piece of gossip. We need the custody order finalized before her deal closes. In case there are shared assets to consider, better to move fast. The words rang out clearly over the string quartet's abandoned instruments, over the clinking of champagne glasses that had gone suddenly, completely still. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Somewhere near the bar, a wine glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the marble floor, the sound sharp and sudden in the stunned silence. The screen shifted to the metadata report text. Marcus's forensic analysis displayed in clean, undeniable detail, the composite photograph, the mismatched lighting Marcus had circled in red, the freelance payment record tracing back to a phone number registered under the name Sienna Cross. A second gasp, louder this time, rose from the crowd as guests began turning towards Sienna, who stood frozen beside Adrian, her face draining of every ounce of colour. "That's not. This is fabricated," Adrian stammered, spinning toward the crowd, his composed public persona cracking wide open. "This is a smear campaign. She's bitter. She's trying to destroy what we've built because she has nothing left." Nobody in the room seemed to be listening to him anymore. Richard Cross, Sienna's father, had gone very still near the bar, his expression hardening into something cold and calculating as he read the details scrolling across the screen. He was, above everything else, a businessman, and businessmen understood exactly what a fabricated fraud case and a pending federal referral could do to every partnership tied to the Whitfield name. "Sienna," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the murmuring crowd with quiet authority, "did you know about this?" Sienna's mouth opened, then closed, no sound emerging at all. Her silence answered the question more completely than any words could have. Eleanor lunged forward, gripping Adrian's arm, as if trying to physically hold together a version of the evening that no longer existed. "This is absurd," she announced to the room, her voice pitching higher with barely controlled panic. "That woman has always been unstable, ever since." "Ever since what, Eleanor?" I asked, my voice calm, cutting cleanly through her unfinished sentence. "Ever since you paid a private investigator to help build a fake affair. Ever since you signed a sworn affidavit describing behavior that never happened, under penalty of perjury." Eleanor's mouth snapped shut. Around the ballroom, dozens of business partners and investors who had spent years quietly tolerating Eleanor's condescension were now watching her unravel in real time, phones already raised, capturing footage that would circulate long after tonight ended. Richard Cross set down his glass with deliberate precision and turned toward one of Adrian's senior colleagues standing nearby. "I want every joint venture between my firm and the Whitfield Pharmaceutical Division reviewed by Monday morning," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. "Effective immediately, we're suspending all pending agreements." Adrian's face went white. 8 years of his career, built painstakingly on the foundation of his family's connections and his own manufactured image of stability, was collapsing in real time, in front of exactly the people whose respect he had built his entire identity around. He turned back toward me, desperation finally breaking through the last of his composure. "Vivian, please. Whatever you want, we can talk about this privately. Not like this. Not in front of everyone." I held his gaze steadily, letting the silence stretch just long enough for every guest in that ballroom to feel its full weight. "You made sure my humiliation happened in front of everyone I knew," I said quietly. "I'm simply returning the courtesy." In the days that followed the gala, the story spread far beyond that single ballroom. A guest's phone footage of Eleanor's unraveling made its way online within hours, and by Monday morning, 3 separate business publications had picked up the story of the Whitfield family's unraveling reputation. Richard Cross followed through on his word. Every joint venture between his firm and Adrian's pharmaceutical division was formally suspended by Monday, and within 2 weeks, the company's board quietly opened an internal review into Adrian's conduct, citing reputational risk as the official reason. The district attorney's office moved faster than I expected. Renata had already filed the forensic report and the email correspondence as part of the custody case, and once the fraud became public, the referral for perjury and fabrication of evidence gained real momentum. Eleanor was the first to be formally charged, her sworn affidavit becoming the centerpiece of the state's case against her. Adrian followed soon after, charged with conspiracy to fabricate evidence and obstruction related to the custody proceedings. Sienna, it turned out, had personally authorized the payment to the freelance actor from her own account, a detail that made any claim of ignorance impossible to sustain in court. I didn't attend every hearing. Renata advised against it, and for once I agreed with her without argument. There was nothing left for me to prove. The version of my life that required their validation, their court appearances, their apologies, had already ended the moment I walked out of that ballroom, with Nora's custody secured and my company's acquisition finalized. The $18 million buyout closed exactly on schedule, 10 days after the initial agreement, landing quietly into an account Adrian had never known existed, built from 2 years of work he had never once asked me about. I used part of it to purchase a modest house 3 miles from the apartment Marcus had taken me into on the worst night of my life, close enough to Nora's school that she never had to change classrooms, close enough to Marcus that Sunday dinners simply became part of our new normal. Adrian resigned from his position at the pharmaceutical company before the board could formally remove him, though the distinction meant very little to anyone who mattered. He moved into a small rented condominium on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place he had once described, dismissively, as beneath people like us. Eleanor, facing mounting legal fees and a fractured social circle that had abandoned her within weeks of the scandal, sold the family estate she had spent decades curating, the same house where she had once looked me up and down and called me the girl who types on computers. I visited that house exactly once more, months later, not out of cruelty, but because Nora had left a small stuffed rabbit behind on one of her final visits before the custody order changed, and I wanted her to have it back. Eleanor answered the door herself, the household staff long gone, the grand foyer stripped of most of its furniture, already staged for the estate sale. She looked smaller than I remembered, standing in the doorway of a home that no longer quite belonged to her. "I hope you're satisfied," she said quietly, no longer able to summon the sharp condescension that had once defined every word she spoke to me. I looked at her for a long moment, thinking of every dinner where she had made me feel small, every calculated cruelty disguised as concern, every lie she had signed her name to under oath. "I'm not satisfied, Eleanor," I said honestly. "I'm just finally free." I took the stuffed rabbit from the hallway table where the staff had left it, and I walked back to my car without looking back. 2 years have passed since the night I stood on that sidewalk in the cold October air, holding nothing but my purse and the certainty that my entire world had just collapsed. The company I built in secret now employs 40 people across 2 offices, developing the same encrypted healthcare data systems I once coded quietly after Nora went to bed, no longer hidden from anyone, no longer something I had to shrink down to fit inside someone else's idea of who I was allowed to be. Adrian works now as an independent sales consultant, taking on small contracts wherever he can find them, the Whitfield name no longer opening the doors it once did. I heard, through a mutual acquaintance, that he reached out to Sienna's father twice after the scandal broke, hoping to salvage some fragment of the connections he had built his entire identity around. Richard Cross never returned either call. Sienna left him within 3 months of the gala, once it became clear that neither her father's money nor her family's reputation would survive being publicly tied to a fraud case. Eleanor lives now in a small rental apartment on the edge of the city, far from the society circles that once revolved around her dinner parties and charity luncheons. The friends who used to fill her guest lists disappeared almost overnight, the way certain kinds of friendships always do when the money and status attached to them quietly evaporate. I don't think about her often anymore. I don't need to. Marcus's cybersecurity firm grew faster than either of us expected, partly fueled by the reputation he earned quietly helping me when I had nowhere else to turn. He still comes over most Sundays, still teases Nora about her math homework, still occupies the seat at my dinner table that once, briefly, belonged to someone who never deserved it. Nora is 7 now. She doesn't remember much about that birthday party anymore, or the months of supervised visits in a room with fluorescent lighting and a caseworker taking notes in the corner. What she remembers instead are Sunday mornings in our kitchen, sunlight pouring across the counter while Marcus flips pancakes badly on purpose just to make her laugh, and a mother who never once, not for a single day, stopped fighting to keep her. I think about that night at the Fairview Grand sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Adrian Eleanor believed that humiliating me in public, stripping away my resources, and isolating me from everyone who might help me would be enough to break me completely. What they never understood is the very things they used to try to destroy me, my silence, my patience, my willingness to build something quietly on my own terms, were the exact things that saved me in the end. The lesson I carry with me now isn't really about revenge, even though revenge is what it may have looked like from the outside. Standing in that ballroom with a screen full of evidence behind me, the real lesson is simpler than that. The people who are quick to tell you that you have nothing, that you are nothing without them, are very often the people most afraid of what you'll become the moment you finally stop believing them. I am not the woman who typed on computers all day, invisible beneath a family's quiet contempt. I never was. I was simply waiting for the right moment to prove it. If you've ever had someone underestimate exactly what you were capable of, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this journey meant something to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are more stories